Jordan.
Casey
Holdahl. It's great to meet you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Great to work with you. Excited for
glad to have you here with the team. And it'll only get better from here.
Casey, I got the email. You had 7 different titles, it seemed like, for your job description, so I think you're going to do a better job explaining it than I will. Why don't you tell the fine people what you do?
Sure. I'm the beat reporter for the team, or the digital reporter, depending on the day of the week. I try to give as accurate of a reporting on the team as I possibly can, while still, staying within the bounds of what is allowable for NBA personnel. I've been doing it it'll be my 10th season, 9 years, a couple years with the Oregonian, or Oregon Live, I should say, before that. So basically, talking Blazers, do a lot of kind of player-related stuff. I know the game, but not maybe as well as someone like yourself. So my goal is to more kind of give an impression of what it's like to be on the team or to follow the team closely, and do the analysis as well. But sometimes I leave that to more of the intelligent basketball people, such as yourself.
I had a couple of years underneath my belt.
Exactly.
Not at that level.
I've heard.
Not that level. I've played against guys that are at that level, of course. But we were talking during the break, training camp coming up around the corner.
Sure.
This year's going to be a little bit different. Obviously, you have a much more experienced team coming back, but there are going to be some actual battles this time around for roster spots.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the past, I would say, 4 or 5 years, training camp is pretty much, going into it, kind of who is going to go where. Particularly before last season, I mean, the whole starting lineup was basically set, and that was the case for, a couple years. Even last year, even when the team turned over, you still pretty much knew how it was going to shake out. This year, I'm really curious and excited about it, because there's a lot of positions, particularly, at the front court positions and at small forward, where I really don't know which direction they're going to go. Between Mason Plumlee and Festus Ezeli and obviously Al-Farouq Aminu switching, or at least sounds like going to play a lot of his time at the 4. So what does that mean for Myers? What's that mean for Mo? What does that mean for Ed Davis? What does that mean for Mo Vonleh?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a whole lot of guys this year where they're really vying for minutes, and there's not. I mean, I think the guys who are returning probably have a bit of a leg up, but I mean, you go out and try to address some of the problems that you had last season through personnel. You figure they're going to want to give those guys a chance to go out there and compete. So I think this year we're really going to, maybe more so than years past, have some actual competition in training camp that dictates what's going to happen come the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think there are going to be some battles. I mean, Alan Crabb, he's got the contract now.
Alan Crabb and Evan Turner.
That's right, at the 3.
And Mo, how do all those guys
And
fit
I think
in?
Terry Stotts, I mean, there's going to be competition
Yeah.
in training camp. And like you said, I mean, there's been years here where 1 through 5, we pretty much knew how it was going to go. We had a pretty good feeling. I think there's at least 2, maybe even 3 spots that are up for grabs going into the regular season. And I think it's going to make for an exciting camp. I am very intrigued, especially about the 4 and the 5.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's just a lot of bodies there. And we were talking about it earlier, with the signing of Greg Steamsman to a training camp deal. But you bring another big body to camp. You take a look at him. You see what he can do. Maybe another team gets a look at him as well. But there's going to be a lot of healthy competition here. And it's already started out there, by the way.
Well, exactly.
But,
yeah.
But come the end of September, once camp gets rolling into the preseason, there's going to be some competition. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, and there's so many guys that I think played well last year, particularly guys like Ed and Noah, that we'll see how that shakes out for them, because there are a lot of guys who consider or can play and who need minutes. And I feel like, again, one of the things that people complained about Blazers teams from the past was that they just weren't very deep. Like they got a good starting lineup, maybe to 6 guys, and then after that there's a drop off. Now it's the other way. You're looking for those minutes for those guys.
And what's interesting is you see this on basketball teams where when you go into the preseason or training camp and the starting 5 isn't necessarily set in stone, that competition amongst players that are maybe positions 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the roster, it really heats up because they see that legitimate opportunity for them, and that only serves to help you out as a team, because now you have guys that are hungrier on the bench. They aren't going to come back complacent for whatever reason after having success last year. They need to feel they need to either prove themselves or justify themselves. And so looking at this increased competition, it's going to be very fascinating to see how it all shakes out. And then, Casey, we were talking a little bit earlier, too, about team chemistry and leadership. And you've been around a lot of Blazer teams. And there was a real shift last season when Damian was really given the leadership role in this team and the chemistry. How much do you think that played into the team's success last year? Because as an athlete, sitting back and watching it, I felt that was a huge part of this team's success and why they were able to really surprise so many people on the outside that didn't believe in them.
Yeah, well, first off, I'd say that I think that sometimes chemistry does get a bit overblown, but in the case particularly last year, absolutely not. I think you can maybe it was understated a bit because you have a team that was super young and didn't have a whole lot of experience, and when you have a guy like Damian who is so welcoming for those guys, it's not like here's Damian and here's everyone else. It's like it's a very flat locker room, and when you're a young team that they don't have any expectations and guys who haven't maybe had an opportunity to play significant minutes other places, when the team leader, when the best guy on the team is like, hey, I believe that you can do this and we're on the same level, we're all going to work hard together. It's not going to be, I'm going to kind of take my time and do what I want to do because I'm the all-star. We're all going to be in this together, and we're all going to fight and compete and play hard and be, a very equal team. And that's not to say that the previous teams didn't have good chemistry, but there was just more stratification. It was LaMarcus and Wes and Nick and Rolo and Damian, and everyone else was, kind of got them where they fit in. The team last year, it was more 1 through 15, we're all going to be in this together, and if we're going to do anything, we all have to play our best, and having that respect and that willingness from your leader to kind of let you work in that space, I think made a huge difference to the Blazers last year.
It's interesting. I think every time I've heard Terry Stotts interviewed, really since the end of last season, and he's been asked about what's the next step for this team, he always says, at least every time I've heard him, he says, we need to be more consistent defensively. We had Coach Osborne on a few minutes ago. That's what he was talking about. So I'll ask you, in your expert opinion, what's it going to take for them to achieve that? What do they have to do to take that next step, to get up into the top 10 defensively this season?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that I necessarily have the answer for you. What I would say is that
Casey Holdahl.
Terry Stotts' teams through his time in Portland have made considerable progress as they've grown together. And I think you saw that in the team, the 2014-15 team. Mm-hmm. By the end of the season, I believe they were a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. They've been together for a while. Obviously, the team switches over last year, and particularly on the defensive end, I think you suffer more than you would offensively. And it's going to take some time to get that back to where it was. Now, granted, personnel obviously plays a huge part in that as well. But I think just being in the system for another year will reap its own benefits. I think, obviously, they went out and added Festus Ezeli and Evan Turner, knowing that we maybe don't have the personnel on this team to be a top 15, top 10 defense. Let's be honest about that, and let's go get guys that we think can help us towards that end. So I think both through organic growth and the personnel is where you get. And again, like Blazers offense, I feel like is so good, and when Terry's offense is really working the way it's supposed to, is one of the best in the NBA. They don't have to be a fantastic defensive team. They just have to be an average defensive team. Yeah. If the Blazers can be an average defensive team with their talent on offense, they can get to the places that I think people want them to go.
It's going to be interesting as we talk to more of the players and staff as the season continues to roll on. About pick and roll defense. It's so important in the NBA, where you take a lot of these matchups and you try to isolate players, and being able to defend the pick and roll effectively at this level is so difficult because you have so many playmakers. But it seems like the teams that can do that well are the ones that find themselves in that top 10, top 15. When you look at the Blazers pick and roll defense, is there anything that stands out or anything that you feel like they're going to focus on, or is it something that might change really game to game in the personnel that they face?
Well, I'd be a bit remiss to kind of speculate on that before we kind of see him a bit, and particularly, like I said, because I think it changes depending on that personnel. I mean, what Mason gives you at the center position is quite different than what Festus gives you at the center position defensively. I mean, it cuts the other way, but since we're talking about defense, and I think that he is going to maybe give them the opportunity to change some of those ways they do it. Maybe. I don't know if they're gonna hedge more, or if it's gonna be a situation where they're gonna try to switch more. I'm guessing probably not, but again, it's one of those things too where until you know kind of how they're gonna go personnel wise, I'm not sure exactly how they're.
We'll talk more pick and roll training camp, and also discuss some of Casey's favorite and least favorite road trips in the NBA when we come back on Trailblazers Courtside. Speaking of which, preseason just around the corner here for the Blazers. It's hard to believe it's here, but get excited for it. And as we take a look at the preseason schedule, Jazz, Suns, Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, and Warriors. Casey, do you still get excited for games? I mean, is there anyone here that you're really anxious to see? And which one do you expect to see, like, in a sense, the Blazers play the majority of their starters in?
Well, yeah, to first part of your question, I do get excited. Preseason, about 2 games in the preseason, you pretty much know what you need to know. Obviously, getting a chance to see Golden State right off the bat with Kevin Durant would be interesting. Since it's the last preseason game, I feel like some coaches use that last preseason game as a warm-up for the regular season. I feel like others are like, we don't care about it at this point. It's like the last game of Summer League. So, that's the one to me, especially at Oracle, that I think is going to be interesting, though. I mean, that Los Angeles trip's always a good time, and obviously the Blazers having defeated the Clippers last year, that's the first time those two teams will see each other. So I think there's a little something there. For me, too, especially preseason, it's more about seeing things that you haven't seen before, seeing what's new. I don't know that you can really necessarily judge a team on preseason, but I think you can kind of get the idea about what's going to be different during the preseason.
Well, and I think that's why Terry Stotts, as the mad scientist, I mean, he's going to be spending the preseason and probably early into the regular season. There's got to be a fun year coming up for Terry Stotts because he gets to experiment with so many different combinations and lineups and rotation. We talked about the depth on this team. I mean, this is, I think, my 17th, 18th year covering this team. I mean, I have to go back and look at all the rosters from all the teams, but this is about as deep a team as I can remember over that span of time. And so what a luxury for Terry Stotts. And obviously it's a long NBA season, injuries, health, that always plays a factor, but just to have that much depth. And I think for Coach, and he just seems like, and we talk about this a lot on the radio broadcast, and I know it's discussed on TV too. I mean, he always seems to push the right buttons within games, and so great coming out of timeouts. And I think he's going to have the luxury of, in the preseason, experimenting with some of those combinations and those different lineups. That's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we saw it beginning last year that Terry used to be really, really regimented with his rotation, particularly, and it made sense at that point because he had a very solid starting 5, and to a lesser extent, maybe not as much talent as he needed further down the roster. So it makes sense to have things really kind of definitive. Last year, I feel like he was much more willing to kind of try different things in the starting lineup and in those lineups. And part of that, I think, was because he had new personnel, and I think part of it is because it was a young team, and with a young team, you have a bit more leeway to kind of figure out what's what. And I think this year, it's a combination of the two. They're still young, but they're not super young. Yeah. But they are new, and some of the guys will be in situations that maybe they're not new situations, but they're definitely increased roles in the situations they're in before. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to mix and match a bit. And I think we're going to see Terry do that as the season goes on.
Keeps guys ready, too.
Yeah.
I mean,
and engaged.
You don't know when your number is going to be called.
It's important to, particularly, through an 82-game season, sometimes you got to feed people along a little bit and get them to come along with you.
Well, that certainly helps anybody that is on that bench. You got to keep everybody engaged. It doesn't matter what level you're at, what sport you're doing. If you can keep everybody on your bench, on your team, ready to go and confident when they get in the game, which is what you see from this coaching staff. It seems like whenever someone gets into the game, doesn't matter what point of the season, they're ready to go, as if they had been playing all along this entire season. And so as the Blazers get set for another season, we'll figure out more about this team. But Casey, that means another year of traveling for you. And with summer winding down and everyone's travel plans somewhat behind them, I want you, and take a second to think about this. Okay. When you think about all the cities you visit during your NBA season, can you give me a city that is underrated as far as you wouldn't think this would be that great of a stop, but surprisingly it is? Maybe it has the best fish tacos there or something, or maybe the hotel or the city layout. But if you have to think about a place when you say, oh, yeah,
well, I don't know if New Orleans is underrated, but I love New Orleans. And I wouldn't.
Why?
Well, because of the people and the culture of the city. New Orleans, to me, more than any other city in the NBA, feels like you're kind of in another country. I mean, you're not, but you could get the feel if you closed your eyes and spun around for a second. If you opened your eyes in New Orleans, you might think to yourself, I might be in, somewhere in the middle of France or somewhere maybe in the Caribbean. So for me, it's just a different vibe to it. It's different than every other city I feel like we go to. I don't mind cold weather cities either. So like we go to a great place to eat in Denver almost every single year. It's a long ride from the airport in Denver, though, so that's kind of a bummer. Though I don't mind that so much because I'm usually writing my story on the bus as we're driving to the airport. So if it's a longer bus ride, I usually get more chance to get there. But places like Denver, places like Minneapolis, I like Minneapolis. People are always really nice. Now the team is starting to get a bit better. I was walking around last year, and I had a couple people, talking about the team and how excited they were for kind of their young guys. So those are kind of the teams for me that I feel like are underrated, or the cities, I should say, that are underrated.
You mentioned the food in Denver. Everyone talks about Portland and food and players.
There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, Brian Anderson, I'd always interview him. He's like, oh, Portland, get to come here for the food. What city do you think, outside of Portland, of course, because we would never mention a city having better food than Portland, what city do you think has the second best food in the NBA?
Well, I'll a caveat first. I mean, it would probably be Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is so big that it's hard to say Los Angeles city. Exactly.
Sure.
Like it's enormous.
Sure.
They've got every single
you
culture.
and
New York, exactly.
New York, right?
I've and part of it too is it's just for me personally, I thrive on repetition. So I find a place and then I just go back to it every single time.
Well, you're going to have to find a new place in OKC. You can't go to Durant's anymore.
Yeah, no, I never. I did.
I
went to my first Sonic. I went to my first Sonic ever this year in Oklahoma City, and I gotta say, I was expecting more. It was kind of late though too.
Oh boy.
But it wasn't what I thought. And I hope if Sonic's a sponsor, I think you do a great job. So that one that I got with the ice creams they show on TV, and it just didn't get up to snuff here.
Put the shovel down.
You gotta
I was gonna say I don't know if I might not make it to the season at this point.
You gotta set the expectation a little bit lower when you're eating that late at night as well. Well, Casey, thank you so much again for joining us. We're certainly excited for this season. We'll love to be catching up with you more and more as the season continues to go on.